Hear a reading now from the book of Matthew, chapter 20, verses 1 through 16. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. When he went out about 9 o'clock, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and he said to them, "You also go into the vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. When he went out again about noon, and about 3 o'clock he did the same. And about 5 o'clock he went out and found others standing around, and he said to them, "Why are you standing here idle all day?" They said to him, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You also go into the vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his manager, "Call the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and then going to the first." When those hired about 5 o'clock came, each of them received the usual daily wage. Now when the first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received the usual daily wage. And when they received it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat." But he replied to one of them, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last the same as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or are you envious because I am generous?" So the last will be first, and the first will be last. The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God. Ladies and gentlemen, before your very eyes today, you will watch the sanctuary of First Presbyterian Church of Santa Fe be transformed into a live courtroom with an actual judge presiding. You will have a front row seat to the people's court, where grave matters of justice and fairness will be decided. As the courtroom drama unfolds, you will no doubt become aware that you are personally witnessing the most dramatic and important courtroom scene that has occurred in America this week. So let us begin. Well, that is the scintillating People's Court music being played in the background, but it's supposed to be on the big speaker, but according it is not working, so we will get moving. Go ahead and pause it.
All rise. Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. The People's Court of First Presbyterian Church of Santa Fe is now in session. The Honorable Judge Bruce D. Black presiding.
You may be seated. Will the parties in this case please introduce themselves to the jury?
Yes, Your Honor, my name is Mary Kuhns, and I'm the plaintiff.
Good morning, Your Honor. I'm Drew Hill, a day laborer and one of the defendants.
Your Honor, my name is Andrew Black. I'm the vineyard owner and also one of the defendants.
Ms. Kuhns, since you're the plaintiff and you filed the complaint, what's your problem?
Well, you see, Your Honor, it's all very simple. Each day I get up bright and early to go to the market to look for work. Last Wednesday, I'm standing in the market watching the sun come up, and Mr. Black walks by saying he has jobs at his vineyard. Given that the economy is so bad with inflation and all, I jumped at the chance to work because, Your Honor, I have a family and need to put food on the table. So Mr. Black and I started talking, and he agreed to pay me a denarius, a full day's wage. So I went with him to his vineyard. Let me tell you, Judge, it was a hot day to be picking grapes. I'm talking back-breaking heat. To make matters worse, we had to pick those grapes super fast, since Mr. Black needed all the grapes picked before the monsoon floods came that afternoon. So worrying about the floods, he kept going back to the market every few hours to hire more workers. At 5 o'clock that evening, Mr. Black brings in the last group of workers, which included Drew Hill, to help us finish. I couldn't believe he brought in Drew and his friends to work with us. They are notoriously lazy. So it's no wonder they're the last group to get picked. Get this, Your Honor. Drew and his friends only worked maybe an hour or so before everything was finished.
Mr. Hill, is this true?
Your Honor, for the record, I'm not lazy. I work as hard as anyone. See, Judge, I spent all day in the marketplace just waiting to get hired. Every time Mr. Black came through, there was such huge crowds trying to get a job, I just couldn't get through the people and catch a break. I stayed baking in the heat of the market all day, just hoping for some work. At the end of the day, I began to worry. I'd go home with nothing but a bad sunburn to a hungry family with no food or money. After all the other workers had gone home for the day, Mr. Black came back one more time and hired my friends and me to work at his vineyard. He told us he'd pay us what was right. At that point, Your Honor, all of us were just so happy to have a job, we gladly accepted Mr. Black's offer.
So what exactly is the problem? It seems to me that everyone got to work and everyone got paid for the full day. Is that right, Mr. Black?
Well, yeah.
Got paid by Mr. Black.
Yeah. Well, not exactly, Your Honor. The problem came when we all lined up at the end of the day to get paid. Mr. Black calls up Mr. Hill over there and the last group to get paid. And get this, Mr. Black pays them a whole denarius, a full day's wage, even though those lazy guys only worked an hour. I'm telling you, Your Honor, it's not fair. They barely did anything. Matter of fact, they mostly just helped us put everything away at the end of the day. Knowing how hard I worked all day, I couldn't wait to see how much Mr. Black would pay me. But here's the kicker, Your Honor. That cheapskate paid us the same exact amount, a full denarius, even though we worked all day and 10 times harder than him. None of us could believe it. Once we saw that Drew and his friends got paid the exact same, we were so mad a riot almost broke out. The more we talked about it, the more unfair it became. Mr. Black should have given Drew and his friends a teeny-weeny percentage of that denarius for the limited time they worked. Mr. Black should have given us the rest of the money since we worked all day. Come on, it's only fair that we get the greater percentage of money since we worked more.
What do you mean fair? Did you not agree to a denarius, a fair day's wage, before you started working for Mr. Black?
Well, I did, Your Honor, but that's before I realized Drew and the last group would get paid the exact same amount for doing far less work. How's that fair? I worked all day in brutal heat, and then Drew comes along in the last hour, the cool of the evening, mind you, and gets paid the same amount. It's not right. It's not fair. It's probably because Drew and his friends are all male, so they get treated better.
Well, you know what a lot of lawyers say. Fair is just another F word with 4 letters. So, Mr. Hill, you've heard what Ms. Kuhns had to say. What's your take? Is what Mr. Black did fair?
It is, Your Honor. I'm so grateful for Mr. Black's generosity. My life has been so hard. Because of him, I could feed my children that night, but I was also able to pay off some of my family's medical bills. Mr. Black is a good businessman, and he is a decent human being who treats all his workers with dignity and respect. Nearly the whole group who worked with me are women, so I don't know what Miss Coons is talking about.
Mr. Black, you've heard both sides. One side says you're a cheat and a cheapskate. The other side says you should be given the humanitarian award for the year. So what's your take?
Your Honor, Mrs. Coons over there was paid a full denarius, a fair day's wage, a wage that she agreed to that morning. I didn't cheat her out of anything. She got paid exactly what I promised her, no more, no less. Rather than be thankful for what she got paid, though, Miss Coons over there just got mad at what Mr. Hill and a bunch of the others got paid. I tried to tell her I am a person who believes in grace and generosity, but Miss Coons, she wouldn't hear it. Miss Coons and her friends kept calling me a thief and a cheater and all kinds of other bad names. It's ridiculous. As a businessman, I have the right to be gracious to my employees, to show generosity when and to whom I want to. I didn't underpay anybody. And this certainly isn't a gender thing, as there were plenty of women in that group working alongside Mr. Hill. Matter of fact, the majority of them were women. I treated everyone equally and simply did what I thought was right. I was just so thankful to get all those grapes in before the storm was coming.
Your Honor, I'm a good person. Heck, I'm a faithful Presbyterian.
Is that an oxymoron?
We believe in doing things decently and in order and logically. What Mr. Black did is neither logical nor orderly. It certainly isn't decent. Matter of fact, what Mr. Black did makes no sense. He isn't a good businessman. He's a fool. I demand justice, Your Honor.
Justice? What do you mean by justice? Mr. Black didn't cheat you out of anything. You weren't underpaid. You received a full day's pay for a full day's work. While Mr. Black's decision certainly seems strange, and it's a weird business model, Mr. Black is entitled to be as generous to his employees as he wants. No one has been underpaid here, and everyone was paid exactly what they were promised. Ms. Coons, I've had enough of your outburst and your outrageous claims of fairness and justice. The real injustice here is that you can't get over how much Mr. Hill and his friends got paid, and more importantly, how generous Mr. Black is. So you're so preoccupied with others and worried about what they got paid that you failed to be grateful for what you got. Mr. Black's generosity gave you a good paying job so you could feed your family. Ms. Coons, if anybody is guilty of anything here, it's you for wasting the court's time and bogging down my docket with your sin of envy. Bailiff, I've had enough of this. Please remove Ms. Coons from the courtroom.
Get her out of here, bailiff.
It's not fair. It's not fair. What kind of a judge are you?
Hit your gavel. Hit your gavel.
Court's dismissed.
All rise. The First Presbyterian Church Court is now excused. Court is no longer in session. Please be seated. So as we saw in the People's Court this morning, the judge found Miss Coons guilty of envy, the second of the infamous 7 deadly sins. So what exactly does envy mean? Most simply, envy is when we desire something that someone else has that we don't. As we saw in court, envy can lead to feelings of resentment and unfairness and injustice. These feelings can become so strong that they cause us to want to bring down others that we are envious of. In contrast to another of the 7 deadly sins, greed, which is about accumulating more regardless of what others have. Envy is always looking outward towards what others possess. As we saw in today's trial, envy often causes us to be bitter, ungrateful, and can make us prowl like a hungry lion waiting for the right moment to snatch up what we want. Reflecting on Jesus' parable, I began to wonder, where does envy come from? And why did Jesus specifically choose to preach on this idea? As it turns out, envy is an age-old sin. Some would even say it's the original sin. Indeed, many theologians argue that Adam and Eve suffered from envy as they saw that God possessed the knowledge of good and evil and eternal life. Desiring these same powers, Adam and Eve became so envious of God that they were willing to do anything, even following the serpent's beguiling ways, to become like God, as Genesis says. A few chapters later in Genesis, we also encounter the story of Cain and Abel. Despite Cain's pride in his sacrifice, God rejects Cain's offering and instead accepts his brother Abel's. Enraged with envy, Cain brutally murders his own brother. Indeed, the Bible is filled with story after story of envy. Envious of their father's favor, Joseph's brothers try to kill him and then sell him into slavery in Egypt. Envious of how he has gained the favor of God and the people, King Saul tries to kill young King David. Not to be outdone by his predecessor, of course. David then envies Uriah's beautiful wife, Bathsheba. David uses his power as king to force Bathsheba to sleep with him, gets her pregnant, and seeking to cover up his envious adultery, David has Uriah killed in the field of battle. Even Jesus' own disciples were predisposed to envy as they constantly bickered about who is the Lord's favorite and who got to be having the most important seat in heaven. In all of these stories, the Bible makes clear that sin begets sin, as envy creates a vicious domino effect that destroys the lives not only of individuals and communities, but even whole nations. Thinking about all the different forms of envy in the Bible led me to wonder, how is envy at work in our lives and in the world today? One only needs to look to social media to get a better sense of envy at work. While social media can bring people together in community, it also often creates a wedge of envy as we constantly scroll seeing friends on the perfect vacation, people eating at the most amazing restaurants of the most incredible meals, and of course, let's not forget celebrities who are living a fairy tale lifestyle. Envy begins to creep in as we wonder, why is my life not like that? Or maybe like those in Jesus' parable, we envy the money that others have and how easy they seem to come into that money. Or maybe we envy the amazing things bought with that money, the incredible house, the dream vacation, the fancy car, the latest and greatest technology, the amazing art and entertainment, and of course those people who got to go to the Taylor Swift concert. Or maybe we envy another person's lifestyle and relationships. The ability to retire on the beach, travel to exotic places, the incredible job, the amazing spouse and family, or those relationships we so deeply yearn for. Maybe we also envy those with the skills, talent, wisdom, intellect, youth, or athleticism that we so deeply and desperately desire. Living in a highly materialistic society that loves the rich, the famous, the beautiful, and the powerful, like the first laborers in the vineyard, it's easy to become bitter. Bitter thinking, I work hard, I do things right. How come my life isn't like that? It is so unfair. Indeed, just take a moment now to think about how envy has creeped into your life. What do you covet? Where have you felt envious lately? Reflecting on these very questions and realizing how envy can destroy individuals and communities, Jesus brings his followers together for a hard lesson. Rather than directly call out how envy is at work in them, Jesus chooses to tell a simple and relatively innocent story about laborers who get hired in the marketplace to go work in a vineyard. According to Jewish law, day laborers were often hired at sunup and to be paid a fair day's wage at the end of the day. The first laborers in this story agreed to be paid a denarius, a normal day's wage. As the day goes on, the vineyard owner hires more and more workers agreeing to be paid what's quote-unquote right. The closing scene focuses on the payment of the first and the last groups. Like most of us, the first group expects that they'll get more money since they've worked all day long in the back-breaking heat. It only makes sense, right? Yet this is exactly where Jesus flips the story on its head. As the first group receives the exact same amount, as the last group. As the first group bickers and complains and groans and moans, the parable reaches its height in Matthew 20:15. The vineyard owner raises this critical question: are you envious because I am generous? Or as the Greek literally translates it, is your eye evil because I am good? Is how the Greek translates that line. The Greek makes clear that the first laborers have lost perspective. They're no longer able to even see generosity, but they're blinded by their envy. In this parable, the vineyard owner clearly symbolizes God, whose extravagant generosity is illustrated by the full payment to the last laborers. As working poor, the last group desperately remains in the marketplace until sundown, knowing that even a day of unemployment will mean hunger and suffering for them and for their family. Touched by their need and knowing his, the vineyard owner dismisses the first group's gripes of unequal pay, which seem relatively minor compared to the injustices of failing to give the last laborers what they need just for basic survival. In telling this parable, Jesus demands that we question the meaning of justice and we regain perspective. Indeed, we must ask ourselves, is it more unjust to worry about people getting paid a fair full day's wage, or living in a society where the unemployed go hungry and suffer? As the late Reverend Cecil Williams of Glide Memorial Church in San Francisco recently said, the true church stays on the edge of life, where the real moans and groans are. Indeed, think about how radical the teachings of this parable are when they're applied to modern social issues like forgiving of student debts or welcoming immigrants who are often depicted as undeserving latecomers. As a caution to his followers, Jesus reminds the church that we are called to stand with those society often picks last. Indeed, the parable ends with the oft-quoted but rarely lived into line, the last shall be first, and the first shall be last. So from a business and economics perspective, this parable makes absolutely no sense, which is exactly Jesus' point. Indeed, Jesus intends this parable to be a shocking reminder that we can't calculate God's generosity and grace like we calculate a day's wages that we depend on. Rather, God's grace is a pure gift that most often comes at surprising times and even to those who are seemingly the most undeserving. In telling us this parable, Jesus upsets his audience and those of us who have become complacent in our faith, thinking we got it all figured out. We know what's fair. We know what's just. And now it's just a matter of figuring out where we fall in the greater heavenly pecking order. Understanding envy as a downfall of the early Christian community, it's unclear whether Jesus intended the first group of laborers to be symbolic of the Jews, who came first as God's chosen people prior to the Gentiles and thus saw themselves as superior, or the 12 disciples. The 12 disciples who mistakenly believed that an early call to faith by Jesus meant that they were more important than the newcomers to the faith. Either way, Jesus' parable is a startling reminder that any person who comes to Christ, even on their deathbed, or the robber who's crucified next to Jesus, ultimately enjoys the same heavenly benefits as someone who has followed God from the very beginning. It can make us say, that's not fair. In offering this hard truth to the church, Jesus knows that when latecomers get equal treatment, it'll cause envy in those who were there first or those who've been there a while. Jesus uses this parable as a warning to all of us to not become envious of another person's seemingly unfair reward, since envy takes away the joy of our own heavenly reward. Rather than look at the world with a resentful eye and look at others with that same evil eye, as the Greek says, Christ calls us to remain a welcoming community as we look with grace-filled eyes at all that God has given us to be thankful for. In telling us this parable, Jesus warns us that the only way to combat outward-looking envy is through inward-looking practices of gratitude. Today, I want to leave you with a practical exercise. A practical exercise to move beyond outward-looking envy and into the practice of inward-looking gratitude. This exercise was given to me by Brother Thaddeus, a friend of mine and a monk at the Abbey of Gethsemane, who was one of the most happy and joyful people I have ever met, which is really surprising given all that he had been through. Thaddeus lost his parents early in his life, and his brother was killed in the Vietnam War. In his mid-60s, Thaddeus had cancer, and when I met him, he was wheelchair-bound and in serious pain. Yet Thaddeus always greeted me with a warm smile, and when I asked him how he was, he'd always say, "Oh, Andrew, I am so blessed. God has been so good to me." Knowing how difficult his life story was, I was always struck by the irony of this answer. So one day I asked Thaddeus, "How are you able to stay so joyful after all that you've been through in your life?" Thaddeus chuckled for a second, and he credited his joyful persistence to a spiritual practice he called the 5 blessings. At the end of each day, Thaddeus would write in his journal or tell a friend or a fellow monk 5 blessings that he was thankful for that day. These blessings could be big or they could be small. From a positive doctor's visit, a call from a friend, an answered prayer, the roof over his head, clean water, or simply the great taste of the orange juice in the morning. Thaddeus said, in our society, it's so easy for us to focus on all the problems that we have during the day, what went wrong, and all the ways we wish our lives were different as we envy others. Thaddeus said to practice the 5 blessings each day is one of the most countercultural spiritual exercises that we can do. Since you become less envious of others and more grateful for what you have and what God has given. So with that said, I want to close my sermon today by simply asking you now to turn to your neighbor and spend the next few minutes telling them 5 blessings or things that you're thankful for this morning. What are you thankful for, man? Thanks, man. Thanks for you participating. It's good to see you up there. Yeah, I'm thankful for you going to GA, man. See. The weather's finally nice. Well, first Sunday we were doing it. Yeah. What else are you grateful for? Where'd you go? Yeah, that's my go-to. Making that. Yeah, man. Are you living here? Are you still living at the end? That's crazy. What do you make of it? I was hoping we'd get one. Let's give it another minute. Let's go ahead and come back together as a group. It's good. I like to be able to hear so much to be thankful for. Indeed, that's so important for us to remember these things in the world that we live in and taking time to practice that. So I really want to encourage you all to do that, and you'll hear that in my charge later. But please join me now in the singing of hymn number 36, For the Fruit of All Creation.